Good evening, Safe Space family, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Safe Space, for those of you that have never been here, is just that. It's a place of safety. It was a place that was dropped in my spirit by the Holy Spirit and by our Father to make sure that people know that there's always hope. There's always hope. We have brand new days with brand new graces and mercy each and every day. No matter what you've done, where you are now, how low you feel that you are, know that there's hope in the Lord. Tonight, we are being graced by what I call professional royalty. Dr. Francis, Dr. Andrea Francis. Welcome, Dr. Francis.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
It is my pleasure as well. Dr. Francis is a counseling psychologist that has over 25 years of experience. And I think I heard along the way on another interview that's possibly as much as 31 years of experience, combination of working in university systems in and out of this country, the school system here in the state of Georgia, her own private practice, educating people about our traumas, our mental health. We so often, especially in our community, ignore our mental health. It is a part of our physical makeup, just as our heart is, our kidneys, diabetes, anything that we may suffer, we give attention to most of the time, except our mental health. Dr. Francis is an author. Her book, I think, was released in June of this year. Is that correct, Dr. Francis?
It was.
It's called Abandon: How Children Suffer When Parents Desert Them. She has a specialty in that area. The book is a compilation, and we're going to let her tell us more about it, of stories. It has a total chapter about what has happened to the Black male in this country, which is a large part of, I think, of what has manifested in our community. It talks about adults after divorce, children that are presently experiencing divorce, abandonment that happens to them in other ways. She also is a specialist in what's called positive psychology that she discovered through a Martin Seligman. Is that the way you pronounce his name?
Seligman.
We're going to ask her about that and a number of other things. She specializes in attachment problems, broken bonds. She treats teens, families, children, couples, etc. She is an all-around doctor of healing and helping us through those difficult times. She also specializes in something that seems to be a recurring thing for me this year, which is generational things, whether they be curses from the spiritual standpoint or the science of it, whereas she has noticed the maladapted tendencies that we develop from the traumas in our life. And some of us that are African Americans, being descendants of slaves, have these things that occur in our lives that sometimes were developed during their lifetimes just to survive. They've been passed on down through generations and not affected us very well. So welcome again, Dr. Francis. I just have so much that I can ask you about here at Safe Space. One of the things I'm going to ask you about, because so often this is a foreign topic for us, mental health. How did you get into the study of mental health and what drew you to this? Because looking at all the things you've accomplished and the things that you talk about, it seems like it's a passion for you or something that you were born to do. Can you tell us a little about that?
I believe my journey began when my parents separated. And my earliest memory as a child of probably 5 was my parents fighting and my mother crying, and I'm hearing my father's footsteps as he ran away from our house, but in my mind ran away from me. And just that stayed in my mind. That's my earliest memory. And that's a traumatic memory. And I've over the years learned that it's not a unique memory. So many of us, our children, see our parents at war. So I think it started as a child that experience made me think a lot about what is love, what is life, what are relationships, what are the role of parents, family. I was always in my head thinking a lot. So my undergraduate was in English literature because I read so much. And in reading, I was escaping to a fantasy world, but I was also learning about people through the creative arts, through literature. And so my undergraduate is in English literature, but it didn't satisfy my yearning to understand the human beings in the real world, let's call it that, outside of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I studied psychology in New York. So I have a master's of arts in education and a master's in psychology, and combined it's a counseling psychology degree from Columbia. And after leaving there, my internships were in schools, and they were also in a mental health institution. And I just was wondering, even what is mental health? What is madness? Okay, so for some of us, in some cultures, what is considered madness in the Western culture is not madness in another culture. So I was, you're trying to discern how. And when, say, even Beloved, which is a book I love, Toni Morrison's Beloved,
Mm-hmm.
the character in there, she had to kill her child. And that's a true story. It's based on a true event in African-American history. The woman would rather kill her child than to have the child go into enslavement. And she is perceived as having this child came back. And I thought about that, and I thought, is that mental illness, or did the child really come back spiritually for her?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that her way of coping and communicating with her child? So I was also concerned about women and mental illness. What is it? I noticed some women who would wear garish makeup. The makeup didn't match their skin, and the eyeliners were off. And I thought, is she mentally ill, or is she projecting a beauty that she thinks is inside? And all of these questions. So it brought me to just an understanding of our condition as Black people who were formerly the descendants of the formerly enslaved, and how we cope and how we manage and how we've survived. Because of the grace of God, I don't believe we would have made it through that Holocaust had we not had God with us. So I am pretty sure I've not answered your question, but this is where I'm.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm getting to there.
It spoke to a
things.
lot. It spoke to a lot because I could see, I thought when you initially said your undergraduate degree was in English literature, and you gave me an explanation. You said because you read a lot. And what came to my mind was she probably read a lot to escape the pain. And then you said it gave me escapism for what was going on around me. And then I thought, well, how did you go from English literature to mental health? And then I thought to myself, as you would answer the question that was in my mind as you were speaking. And you bridged the gap by saying it was always what was inside of me, because you were very introspective. You were in your head a lot. So you noticed people that had maybe odd behavior or something that was outside of the norm. And then you said something that really pricked me that I never knew. You said what is considered madness in Western culture is not in other cultures. And then you went on into the story about the book Beloved, that the killing of her child in her mind was freeing her child from a lifetime of, and I'm paraphrasing my interpretation of what you said, of torture and being beaten, and that it was a freedom, and that her child coming back maybe even really spiritually or just in her mind allowed her to cope with the deed that she did. So you answered a lot of things for me as to who you are and why you ended up doing what you do. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. And I think you captured it in a nutshell. Perfect. Perfecto.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what was going on in my mind when you were talking, because I think I am a pretty empathetic person. I don't know if I would call myself an empath, but I can see and hear what someone must have been feeling through one, situations, even if I haven't experienced them, two, through their words. Yes. So I read a lot into what you said.
Yeah. And that's a gift. Being an empath is a gift. And because you're not feeling sorry for someone, but you're actually walking in their shoes and experiencing that. And that's a double-edged sword, though, Shelby, because sometimes you feel so deeply and you grieve for people. How do you pull yourself back? Okay. So there is that comes with this gift that we have. And I believe as Black people, we are truly gifted in so many ways, in that we have dreams. We can dream, so many of Black people I know, different cultures, which is like, okay, we dream our grandparents, we have a dream from our mothers who have passed on, or some kind of dreaming. And that dreaming might be considered, oh, crazy people, but it's part of it's part of our gifts as Black people, this spiritual level, the spirituality where we're tuned in to those of our ancestors on the other side. It's just real, because it's a continuum, and if we're believers, we know that they're with our Heavenly Father.
Right.
That they're in a place of peace.
Right.
I also truly believe that as the ones who are the descendants of those who survived, I feel that our people had a choice. They could have fallen over back into the ship. They could have committed, taken their own lives, but they walked towards a certain horror that they didn't know. And here we are.
Survive.
And survive and joke and can laugh and create music and art and fashion, and they're beautiful. That is us.
Isn't that amazing?
It makes me so emotional, because we're so beautiful.
And that was such an oppressed situation to be in. So to even be able to play music or to laugh or to joke and to
love,
to thrive, to create. And some of us, especially the women, were even in the position to have to love the children, nurture them, raise them while their parents oppressed us. And to still be able to love all of that brings me to something that you said. Healing comes from spirituality, forgiveness, which was a part of the positive psychology that you were introduced to by Mr. Martin Seligman. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
As a psychologist, I was trained in the Western model, all of my education in New York, wonderful school, beautiful, Columbia, but it's by the Western philosophy of thinking. And I was always matching it against my own as a Black woman, Black Jamaican, an African descendant. Did it match up? And oftentimes I had to tweak what they said to match what I know our parents experience, my clients experience, I experience. And pretty much the philosophy of the West is really focused on depression, and it's a disease model, fixing the disease. Martin Seligman, an American white guy, but I think he had grace upon him, because he said he was, and I heard him speak, in one of his YouTubes, you can Google him, that he was the president of the American Psychological Association, and he was about to address these people, how many hundreds of them. And he thought, I do not want to be a part of sadness anymore. I don't want to do it. I want to talk about what's working. Let's shift our thinking from the what's not working, the disease model, to the happiness model, the optimistic model, to focus. And now that's not to say we're not going to, not pay attention to what's not working, because that's how we can fix it. But so that we're not always heavy, burdened down by what's not working. We keep moving because we are reminded that there are things that are working.
Right.
Our work, and it balances out, because when there's an imbalance, the focus on that negativity, that's what leads to serious depression, right?
I think we need that. I think we need to focus on what is working. We're always aware of the heaviness and the negativity and the things that are not working. And we're being honest with ourselves. We can't escape it. It's always ever present. So it's a effort to do things the way he developed this model, to think about it from a treatment standpoint. I would think it's very advantageous.
Yeah, to shift it. And I think it's more aligned with our people. Had we not been focusing on what was working, we would not have survived. It aligned, it clicked with me because I thought, okay, this is the Western language I can relate to because it is of our mindset. So what is concerning to me is that we are forgetting our spirituality,
Oh, yes.
forgetting our ancestors and what they've been through. Oftentimes, we don't want to tell the stories that are painful because we're trying to protect the children. And in so doing, they forget. They don't know. If they don't know, they won't appreciate what their grandparents did, what their mothers did. And I know it's trying to prevent them from being hurt. But I think we really are hurting them when they don't know. Because gratitude, being thankful, here I am, Lord. You know, if it weren't for you, where would I be?
And standards,
expectations, the hope of the family. You know, look at you, you know, for example, you know, my goodness, you're in high school. And I've seen so many young people, you know, when I worked I've recently retired. This is my first school year without going into the school building. So when I see a school bus, I'm like, I have these little jump here, you know, okay, they're going on to school without me, you know, but I spent so many years in the schools trying to tell children, I need you to go home. This is your homework for me. Go home and I want you to do your family tree for me.
Mm-hmm.
And put people names in the boxes, whatever you do, and give me a little story on each person. And or I would say, you live with your grandma, you know your grandma, yes. Go ask grandma to tell you a story about her life. How did she get here? Was she a part of the Great Migration when people had to flee the South
and go
up north? Yeah, but now we're coming back, right? We're coming back.
Oh, big time.
Full circle.
Time. My family never left. I was born and raised in Alabama.
Oh, you're a true Georgia
now, some
girl.
of my family left,
True
but
Southern
the vast
girl.
majority stayed. But we were blessed in a dynamic that's a little different. And this is going to lead us to my next question. We were blessed because I knew more of my maternal side than my paternal side. Even though my father was in the home and I knew his immediate siblings and some of my first cousins, I was around my mom's family predominantly without a shadow of a doubt. And her grandfather, which was my grandmother's father, was the result of a prominent judge that took advantage of his mom. So he was half Caucasian. In the fashion that some of those men from that time, I don't know whether it was guilt or just the decency that was in them, he looked after his son from a distance, because I don't think my grandmother's father, listening to the stories, wanted to have anything to do with him. He was angry because of the way that he was conceived. And, but we owned land, he did, that provided for his siblings, his children, which were my grandmother, their mom. There were people literally in southern Alabama. I'm from the southern tip of Alabama, working on his farm. He was the only Black one amidst all of these white farms that had people working for him. He had to drive to a neighboring town to pick them up that was like 20 minutes away, which is where I was born and raised, to bring them back. So his son would make that migration every day, pick them up, bring them back to work for him, because all of the people in the local area worked on the white farms. So my grandmother and her siblings, and she would be 105 now, they all were college educated. So they had a little different story, my family did, than a lot of the stories that were from Southern Alabama. So they had some options and they lived a little different life, which I find so interesting that happened in that time, that he had the ability. I remember my grandmother saying that they had a T-model Ford in the 1920s, a Black man in Alabama.
How awesome is that? That's wonderful.
It's just so different though. And all I know is what I know, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So, but I understand why a lot of families, the vast majority, migrated. I get it. Looking at
get away. It was domestic
looking at Alabama in the 1960s. We're talking about the 1920s.
Yeah.
Birmingham in the 1960s, dogs were being released on people, hoses. So that leads me to this intergenerational trauma. Explain that to us. Tell me a little about that and what your research has found and how it relates to our life spiritually, because as a Christian, I believe everything goes back to the Word of God. Everything correlates some type of way. We just heard a story in the sanctuary tonight about healing from trauma and hurt, as Paul talked about in 2 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, the 5th to the 7th verse, of forgiving, comfort, not to be outwitted by Satan's device. And I don't want to go on and on, but he talks about, you know, what we have to do in the realm of forgiveness to be free from hurt. So, and another lady that was a medical professional gave the analogy of it, the way you treat a severe ulcer or wound. It was the same steps. So that's what I mean when I say I believe most things go back to the Word of God. So tell us a little bit about this intergenerational trauma that is so prevalent in our race, and I'm sure many others.
Yes, well, I'm looking here at my notes here, in that there are 3 groups who really they have done research on: descendant of Africans, the Jewish people who suffered the Holocaust of the Nazi, and the Native American people, Native peoples. Yeah, and because what was taken away, now we suffered the longest, and we still are, and we're still traumatized every day. When I was coming home yesterday, and I saw a Black man walking very quickly, and a police car was alongside him, following him, and I was like praying for him, like, oh my God, what is this? What is this? And they stopped him, and he's an older man. I don't know what he did or what they perceived he did. And the young officer, very confident white guy, came out and, you know, had the man on his knees, and that to me is, we are constantly being traumatized. Okay, constant. So for African descendants here in the United States, it's not over. I feel like for some of the other groups, they saw an end, more or less. Now the Native peoples are still suffering with, you know, they have their own situation with alcoholism and things.
Through these casinos that are coming, you know, all over, but they still have this generational trauma. They just have money.
And so, but we aren't over it yet. So imagine a family living in, say, Nigeria, you know, Lagos, and being kidnapped, separated, brought on a ship, in the bottom of the ship, being tortured, beaten, being sold. You know, I heard of a story of one person who was able, Equiano tells a story, if you want to read of the life of Equiano. He tells a story of remembering Nigeria and coming to being put on a ship and being, you know, traveling around even the United States and the Caribbean. He was able to write that down. So that memory of being somewhere free, kidnapped, okay, the torture of that, seeing loved ones being taken away, the begging, right? The begging, the father can't protect his child, the mother can't, she's carrying it, all of those, fright, the fear, the worry, just the horror, the hyperventilating, the anxiety, you know, all of those things. Epigenetics has proved is handed down to us. And so we think about the United States, Alabama, lynchings, loved ones hung on trees and parts of them taken off to be kept. No, this is constant, constant. I call it domestic terrorism. And the horrible sum of George Floyd. I just, you know, just been, and there's so many more. So there's and generational to me is reinforced because of events. We have got no break. We don't get a break. So even if there are families that started with enslavement and they've done had property, what did the father have to do to keep his property?
Right.
What did the mother have to do? What did, you know, what are the events? Did she have to be hard? Dr. DeVry talked about post-slavery trauma syndrome, and she gave an example of some mothers, you know, scarring the pretty daughter so that the master wouldn't look at her. You know, these are things that it took she had a hard in her heart to do that. And the girl is like, Mommy, don't you love me? Why are you doing this to me? And she's like, shut him out. You don't know what you know. I know what I'm doing. You know, so there is that. Is it love or is it what is that? But she's trying to protect her daughter. She's looking at the bigger picture. So these feelings are handed through our DNA. They come down through us. In addition to which, researchers found that the medication for, I want to get it right, is it high blood pressure?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't work for the descendants. I think it's diabetes, for the descendants, for us. Any group, us who have gone through the trauma of enslavement, the medication does not work, its potency is reduced. It works on Africans and it works on Europeans. Those of us who have gone through the crucible of enslavement, it doesn't work full time. So the conversation about reparations is that they tweak the medication so that it works for us. Our bodies receive sugar. And we also got the salted meats. So our system has been altered by that traumatic experience of enslavement. So that's part of reparation, that just fix the medication a little bit so it can work fully for us the way it worked for Africans and for Europeans who have not experienced the trauma of enslavement, the ancestral, and it's handed down to us. So generational trauma, it causes us to startle, and for us, because of this America, where we're traumatized all the time, it never stops. There's startling, there is depression, there's lack of trust, there is the attachment. I believe it was handed down that we love, but we don't get too attached because we might lose that person might not stay. We had to tell ourselves we can have partners who stay, we can do things that we can unlearn that, but we have to do sometimes cognitive behavior therapy to change the way we think. All right, so I feel generational trauma has to be understood within the context of each family. What my grandfather's grandfather came to Jamaica to enforce something called apprenticeship. Mm-hmm. After enslavement, slavery had been abolished, he came right after, and he was a judge. And the research I found, these judges were cruel. He had a relationship with a woman who was formerly enslaved, but he left back to Scotland with his wife. She was left with the children. Mm-hmm. How did that work?
Right.
What did she feel? How did she treat her children? It came down now. My grandfather's father was extremely bitter. Could it have been because he was abandoned? Because he had been hurt? He wasn't loved. So my grandfather, I found him a very cold and detached person. I just didn't know this guy. We saw him every so often because my mother would take us to him to appeal to him to have my father take care of us. My father just didn't attach to us. And I spent that time pondering these things. And in so doing, I've come to accept that he learned these behaviors from his own father, and the father before him, and the father before him, and the father before him. Okay, my mother, on the other hand, coped with her unhappiness, depressed, because she couldn't manage with 5 children. I am inclined to be anxious. I'm an anxious personality because I don't know what's going to happen. And anxiety is an illness of worrying about the future. It's a future. Depression is worrying about the past. So, I feel like it's knowing our stories, being okay, and understanding that human beings tried. They tried in so many ways. They weren't perfect, but here we are. And the more we know is the more we can do things differently and better. It often means that we need help from a professional who we can relate to and who will understand what we're saying.
And help us.
And help us
to dig. So
yes.
Often what I hear in what you're saying is that this generational thing which is kind of what I've learned through the spiritual and through generational curses. But you're dealing with it more from an analytical point. And what I mean by that is like the example that you just gave, that these men developed attributes of not attaching. The first father, the Scottish gentleman, had a lack of care, possibly because he had a family. And this was not something that he was going to be
he had
able
stepped
to.
out with a black
He
woman.
stepped out with a black woman.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
these children
Yeah.
were of
Yeah.
less interest to him. But his children developed that lack of attachment because they didn't have anything around, and the father around. So it was passed and passed and passed and passed. And then their mother might have dealt with them because she was left with them in a way that she did not attach. So they had nothing to example or pattern themselves after, to have love and a bond. So they passed it down, 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 down. And
that's just one example, because maybe she tried to love, but she had to go to work.
Right.
She had to pay the bills.
She was overwhelmed.
So she was love, but there was also the issue of making ends meet, because she's a single parent, and so many of our single mothers got to make ends meet, and they might be aggressive. They might, but they're so stressed because they got to make ends meet.
And they're trying to protect their children too. Yes, they have to make ends meet, but they have to instill protection in the kids, because the kids so often, so early, have to do these things and be wise for themselves because their moms are at work. So they're trying to equip them to take care of themselves in ways that they really shouldn't have to deal with. And then
in our community, how in our community we start early with things because we have to. A middle class and well-to-do children are fortunate, but maybe not, because I feel like they don't know how to cope well, because they have so much, and we've protected them from challenges, which is how we have survived. So it's being wise and understanding how to do that balance with our children. I feel we need to know our history. It's not taught in school. So how do we know it? Through our families. And many of our families don't want to speak about the ugly things, the hard things, but it's our families. And here, story shows our strength.
That's right. That's right.
It shows our strength.
You just said something that's so true. I credit, and I've thought about this, especially during the challenging seasons of my life. I was raised around my mom's parents. They were very close to where my mom and dad and I lived, but my father would have overprotected me and not exposed me to anything, and my grandparents too. But my mama, she was that balancing act. She threw me in the deep water every chance she had. She really didn't have to, but I think she felt that she was overprotected and not really equipped to handle things in some things, because my grandparents were overprotective in some ways. And
maybe you can understand why, though, in that time. She had to be safe.
I do. And
black girl.
And she was a girl. They had three.
And there was a clan, and they're looking for those pretty little black girls.
And she was gorgeous, in my opinion.
Yeah. It really is. It's interesting.
And she was
find that balance.
She threw me in the deep water, and my grandmother used to oppose it sometimes because she thought she was doing it too young. And she's like, "Don't do that to her. You didn't have to do it." And this was her quote. And I thank her for it so much. And she's been gone 6 years, but I've seen it in my life when those rough seasons came, and I didn't have the support that she did. I wasn't married at the time, and I didn't have her and my dad, and I didn't have my grandparents. My mom always had her parents for the most part, or a sister. I'm an only child, so it was me and the Lord. And so she equipped me because she threw me in the deep water, and when no one supported her decisions with me. But she used to tell my grandmother, she's not going to be a fool. She needs to know. And she needs to have the strength and to know how to handle it. And I figured out quick that I had to use my brain and not my heart. And even though it was still, because I was kind and I was in a kind environment, it was still kind of rough for me a lot of times. I had the strength to endure because of what she did. I get it.
Wisdom. She gave you wisdom.
I get what you're saying, very much
Yeah.
so.
Our children need to know. Our children need to know and not watch so much TV on Grand Theft Auto or Fortnite. That's okay to play games, but they also need to spend time knowing their history, because they can read anything on TikTok, like slavery was just a dream, it didn't really happen. And they might believe it because they believe all kind of nonsense come on TikTok. That's so real, but it's not true. So we can't depend on other people to teach us our stories. We have to teach ourselves our stories, teach our children our stories. Just something about grandma, grandpa. Look at your ancestor property at that time. How he must have had such dignity, and he kept focused, because certainly I'm sure they weren't in love with him.
No,
right.
it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
couldn't have been easy.
No.
Just listening to my grandmother talk about how he worked.
Mhm.
And I think he died by the time he was like, he didn't make 70, because he worked very hard
Worked
on
so
that farm
hard.
every day.
Yeah.
And his
Pushed through
wife
the pain.
lived much
He
longer
pushed through the
because
pain. He pushed through the
he
pain.
died in the field.
Yeah.
He died out there. A massive heart attack, and was gone very quickly. I think my mom was a teenager. I think he died around 1959, and my mom was born in 44. So that would have made her, what, about 14? She was the youngest of the three daughters. But I remember her talking about the day. See, being around all of that and being around my grandparents, I know about things that happened way before my lifetime. And it gave me
You're grounded.
It gave me a foundation that so often children don't have now.
Yes.
And it is so important to pass that down and create that foundation and have something that they hold dear and that they're willing to guard, and that they have not a negative pride, but let's just say a dignity about, to make sure that it manifests something positive in their lives, to leave in the earth, that when someone looks back at that bloodline, and they go back and fill out that tree, that it works. He died in 65. He was 65 years old. My cousin is here. She's telling me that grandma's daddy, which was her granddaddy, was 65 years old. I knew he didn't make 70. So
he was young. I'm 61, a young guy.
He was 65 and he died because he had worked so hard to maintain what he had built for his family. And it did give them ease. It did give them choices, his children, and even his siblings, and some of his siblings' children. I know that one of his nieces, he educated her at Alabama State, and she was a teacher her entire life. So he not only educated his children, he did for his brothers and sisters' children that were not in the position that he was in. So he carried a great load, but it was important to him because he knew he was creating legacy in all of us.
He had a vision for his people. And that's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing.
And I think it structured the family from him down in a way that it set us up, if we chose to be successful, whatever that means, because it means different things for different people, but it always means something that is positive and that honors God, because we all have different walks. He has different plans for us, but we'll know once we are achieving those things, kind of like you doing what you do. I believe listening to your story and looking at your research and researching you as a professional, it speaks to you walking in the calling for why you were placed on this earth. You taking all of your lemons and turning it into lemonade and blessing those people that come to you, even from your own story and your own pain, which I think those are testimonies that we live, letting people know that, no one said that it would always be easy, but we are charged to take it and make the best that we can of it for ourselves and for those around us. You never know who's watching. Sometimes we find out in life that people are watching us, and not only are they watching, they're drawing strength. And I've had people come to me and say, hey, I didn't know you were dealing with all of that. You look like everything was always perfect. I said, well, it wasn't. Hellfire was breaking loose. but you have to keep going. Speaking of that, how do you think COVID affected the mental health of our country in general, just not our people, and the lasting effects of it and how we're even working through it now from your perspective as a mental health professional?
Well, I'm going to start with the children because they were cut off from their social outlet, which is very important for their development. They missed out on play, interacting with friends, and of course with learning. Schools tried online learning, but they didn't have a choice but online. And I know that there were children who did not go on. Or I saw children, because I was in the schools at the time, when we went, I was actually in the school, but I was working from my office. They would, wear their hoodies or they wouldn't engage. So we missed the social piece. As a result of children having devices, many became exposed to pornographic material, which they wouldn't have normally accessed so early. And so I tell myself sometimes that there are people who actually go to work every morning and their job is to entrap children. And they come home from work, and if they have entrapped children, they've not had a good day at work. So, and it's so disturbing to me that that's somebody's job. So we have children who have lost innocence because of their online behaviors and the gaming. They've also lost the and this translates now to teenagers, older adults, even grown-ups, the work ethic of going to the routine. Not only here in America, I was in London last week. The help wanted sign was out. Nobody wants to go to work.
No.
In Jamaica, it's the same thing. They rather just go on TikTok or whatever this falls place to get notoriety. And so it's a thing. People, they just don't want that. We've lost that work. The beauty of work. And maybe the world is looking at things differently now. Maybe we need to start to have focus on coding and computer training. Maybe that's where we are. Or agriculture, grow back to the land. But we lost some of the humanness, and we also lost some of the skills. And worshiping online, people stop going to church.
Yes.
And to get them back into the building again, they've gotten out of the habit. And so several things were lost. But COVID, though, caused people to read. Some people just turned to more research. They were able to connect with people in a different way, learn new things. Here we have YouTube, which is a place for wonderful learning. The issue then is to discern what is good and what is not good for our soul. That's the challenge. But there's so much out there, I think, exacerbated by COVID, that people can learn so much and grow. So all in the pandemic, we're all struggling, but it has certainly changed our world.
It has. Do you think that, like everything else that we've been through as a world, and of course, as Christians, we know that he has a plan and we're going to work through it. Do you think that the lasting effects that you've just spoken of are going to just transition into a different way of doing things for the future that may level off and actually be okay? Or is it going to be of more detriment to us? And I'm going to give you an example of what I'm thinking about. Just one example, one area that you mentioned, people not wanting to go out to work. Now, the positive side of people that do work now home is they have a better personal work-life balance. Do you think that is, did I lose her? Dr. Francis? Think I did. You're back? Take your mute off. I can't hear you.
Oh, I said, I don't know what happened. I disappeared.
It's okay. It's technology. It happens. Do you think the work-life balance is going to be a positive thing once we can level this off and normalize it and make it a way of life? From what I've heard from even some senior level people on my job was the other day was in my office talking to the VP of our call-in area. And she said the productivity that she noticed during COVID for people being at home, they're happier, they have a better work-life balance, and they produced more work. So do you think that as we transition into the future, that way may be something that we can level off and move into the future and it be a better way of doing things?
It's a double-edged sword, I think. I think the people working from home some people had a very difficult time with their children and managing it, and some people were very lonely. I know someone who just wants to go back into the building. Her position has completely been, it's obliterated. It doesn't exist anymore. It's all online. But she missed the relationships. She missed walking from her car to her building, which gave her like a mile to walk. She parked far away and it gave her a chance to exercise. So I don't know if we can leverage a hybrid, perhaps, and maybe a choice for those that want to work at home and those who want to come into the building. I don't know if that is profitable. I don't know how that would work out, but many people experience loneliness
and depression.
Depression. Yeah. They were just so sad in the house. They missed the laughter of friends, so it all depends. It's hard for me to give a clear one answer, but it all depends. And some jobs people need to be in the medical field. People have to be in the hospitals. Some fields need people in there. Some people don't have a dedicated space for work at home. How will that play out? But I feel we're in transition. We're learning. This is a new experience for us. How do we emerge from this? What does it mean? There are a lot of positives, but there are some things to consider. Mental health.
And I'm concerned to tell you the truth. But you started with children, and we're going to wind this on around and down with children because I have a feeling that is a special place in your heart. You spoke of ACE, adverse childhood experiences in the mental health and development of children. Can you tell us a little bit about that, as well as how the birth order of a child affects the experience of trauma, or how it just may manifest them as an adult? Those two things I found very interesting.
Well, ACEs describes adverse childhood experiences, and they could come from being abandoned, divorce, the death of a parent, and we have parents going off into the military, whereas worrying about it, that parent will come back. There are children who don't have food, who may not have, when they come home to a hostile environment with violent parents who are addicted. So all of these things affect a child. Children need to be safe. They need to feel that they're loved, and that when they're protected, and that they can grow and thrive, and it can play. Play is very important. Adverse childhood experiences interrupt what is healthy and normal. When a child was torn away from their mothers during enslavement, that's a traumatic experience, So we're talking about anything that interrupts what's a normal flow of a child's development as they thrive and grow. And the second question was, I'm sorry.
Birth order.
Birth order. Adler, there's some theory that suggests where children are born impacts how they behave. Firstborn, sometimes is perfectionism. The first child, the parents try to get it right. They try to read all the books. They try to make this child the one that, textbook, forgetting and the traditional ways of growing a child, that they need an extended family. It's important for balance. And the last born is often the one, but you give the joke saying, by the time the parents get to the last born, they're so tired that kid can do anything they want. Like, oh yeah, you're on your own.
So how do you see that manifesting in the last born's behavior?
A risk taker. talking back, doing pretty much aware of things before the others, maybe receiving the cell phone too soon. The others are like, how did he get a phone in second grade and I had to wait till the eighth grade, things like that. So the experiences are, I feel, a lot of last born children are very more aware and more interact more in a risky way, I can say, with the world than the firstborn, who is often was sheltered, told to be careful, had to set an example for the other children, had to walk, carefully and not upset the family. The middle ones, the middle-born children are sometimes feel that they're forgotten or they're overlooked, or they should just play along, or nobody cares about me. It's always about the first one or the last one who's giving everybody a headache, so.
I've heard that in my own family with 3 children. My mother was the youngest. Their sister that was deceased, there were 3 girls. The oldest one died early, like around 27, and left a husband and 3 children. And then the one that is living is my aunt that's in LA. She's 84. She's the middle one. She's the rebel. I think my mom, which was the youngest and the oldest, had more personality traits that were similar, but she was and she's the last she's still living. And so much of what you're saying, I identify with. So we have this wonderful, wonderful book that is published by Is it Bloomberg?
Bloomsbury.
Bloomsbury, that's it. I knew I was mispronouncing it. Again, the title is Abandoned: How Children Suffer When Parents Desert Them. What would you like the audience to know about that book, outside of the fact that we're going to give them your information as to where you are in private practice, of course, where they can go obtain this wonderful book? Just give us a little bit about that in closing, and I would like for you to share your information as to where you treat. I think it's the Atlanta Center for Wellness in Sandy Springs here in the Atlanta area, but about this book.
It speaks about what children experience when a parent leaves them. It started out with my looking at fathers because of my experience, how I felt insecure, my siblings, how it impacted us without our father being at home, with a single mother trying to do it all. But I was directed when I was approached to publish. The publisher said, we would like you to actually look at mothers. And that threw me off, because mothers don't leave, but they do.
More so now than ever.
Yes, more so now. And so I had to I explored it as well. For many reasons, parents leave typically to find work, or to find themselves. I want to experience, myself. I want to come into myself. I'm not ready to raise a child. Children are born from rape, attacks. And so that is another story for the child to learn. You're here because of an unwanted act, but I want you. That's a very difficult conversation, but it's the one that I believe a mother would pray, or the grandparents who are raising the child, pray before speaking, that we love you, and you are brought to us, So how and why parents leave. I also look at the theory of why parents are important. I look at, hear from children, what they experience and how they cope. Some cope better than others. The extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles help them to cope. Some don't cope so well. They go online and they create these different personas, or they make stuff up, or they act out. I also look at how we can help these children, co-parenting. And I know it's an ideal, it's a word, but I really feel if parents have found love individually, they can co-parent, because their love needs are met, and they co-parent for the children's sake. So that is explored as well. And finally, different things that we can do to help children to deal with this feeling of being abandoned, using play, stories, mental health interventions, positive psychology interventions, which are very specific. The extended family, helping the child to know that they're here, loved, and they'll thrive because they're wanted. They're
Right.
wanted. Yeah.
Right.
So
That is so interesting. You said two things that I want to ask you about that popped up in my head. I was going to wrap it up. But one thing you said, love needs. Can you explain? I have an idea what that is. And I think so often as women are a near and dear topic to my heart because I understand being a woman and all that can be required of us today. We sometimes have to head households with and without children. We're expected to be wage earners. And sometimes the higher we get, the more the masculine attributes are called upon. But yet when we get home, we're supposed to return instantly to being this soft, loving, submissive woman. But yet we're expected to produce, and function in the world and earn money and buy homes and do all the things that women do today very well, I must say. But that love need and sometimes the validation or even facing going into a situation where you are the expert and you're questioned and not treated as an equal because you are a woman and you have to defend and prove your worth and defend and prove yourself. I could go on and on and on about the scenarios of being a woman. And sometimes no matter how much you have produced in an excellent manner, you're still questioned as if you've done nothing. Can you speak to the love need and how it connects to being a woman in today's society from your professional opinion?
I feel that America is a very unique place in that in other countries where there is a homogeneous community, for example, with the people who are your friends are, say, Black. The people who you don't like are Black. People who you like are. So there's an understanding of experiences and relationships. In America, not only are we descendants of Africans, but we are also trying to prove to another set of people that we are worthy. Okay, so there is a layer there that is not within other places. So it adds to the stress and the pressure. I feel the way we cope is that we surround ourselves with people who we know love us. You have a church community of women who you can talk with freely, and they can understand what you're saying because they know they live in this particular environment. Love needs are just being told that you're lovely. You know, so there are words of affirmation. Gotcha. There's touch, physical touch.
That's right.
You know, there's gifts. And it's just knowing that you can be yourself. You can just be free. Like when you come home and you close the door and you go, I'm home.
Right.
So love needs to me is being with people where you can be home. You can call them home.
Right.
You're home. You're home. And they'll take care of you. I believe often we have to make the tough decision to shed those toxic people, those emotional vampires who are not good for us as women.
Right.
They're just not good. They're too insecure, they're too unstable, and they're unhealthy. And if we are with people who make us anxious and worried and we have to try to show what we have, these are not good people for us, and these are not sisters at all. These are not sisters.
And many times it's males that do that.
For them. Oh, you were talking about men. Oh,
no, it doesn't matter. But when you said sisters, I get that. But many times it's males that do that. Even in the way they speak to you, it's condescending, and I don't even think they're really aware of it. But out of the mouth flows the issues of the heart.
Yes, exactly. I've always said this is very
if you have
insecure
a prayer
person.
life, if you have a prayer life in any level of discernment and intellect, you know what a person thinks of you by what they do when they're not even aware that they're doing it.
Yes.
So
you are right. You're correct. If it's a man, you can tell where he's coming from. He's very insecure. Why can't he not just see the beauty of you and all of what you've accomplished? It's not necessary to hurt you and to put you down.
They do it through ignoring. They do it through withholding affirmations. They do it through questioning and demeaning, even though you have shown up time and time and time and time again. You even, if you're not careful with yourself, you'll get to a place that you don't feel that you can make a mistake. And that's human to error. And then when they make a mistake, it's not up for discussion.
Yes, yes. Yes, yes, I know what you mean.
Yes, it has been a delight to have you. I have looked so forward to you being here and been so excited about this. And you are welcome back to Safe Space anytime. Matter of fact, I think we should make a date for that to happen definitely in 2024. So give us your information about your private practice. I know it's at the Atlanta Center for Wellness in Sandy Springs. Any phone numbers, websites, anything that you'd like to make us aware of, and as well as where we can obtain your book.
Right. My book is available on Amazon or Bloomsbury Publishers. Amazon is the quickest place to get it. So it's Abandoned: How Children Suffer When a Parent Deserts Them. I am in person at the Atlanta Center for Wellness, and this is 6100 Lake Forest Drive. The telephone number, I'm looking for it here. The telephone number is, let's see, if you just Google it, you'll find it.
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
443434162. If you just bring up Atlanta Center for Wellness, my bio will pop up and how to find me. I am available for online sessions and through Atlanta Vinings Counseling Service. So I do online through one portal and then in person through the Atlanta Center for Wellness.
Perfect. We will add all of that information in the credits, so to speak, of the show, so they can go there and get it. And of course, Safe Space is available on Facebook under Safe Space with Shelby Arrington, and also YouTube, Safe Space with Shelby Arrington. The web address, yes, it is. It's my website. My website is Hope, HOPEAT, SAFESPACE. That is hope at safespace.com. You can also reach Dr. Francis through that website, because I'll be more than happy to connect you with her. Thank you again so much, Dr. Francis, for gracing us with your presence and your knowledge. You have been a blessing, and I know that there are people out there that haven't even watched this yet that will be blessed by your wisdom, your knowledge, and the revelation that you've shared here tonight at Safe Space. Again, thank you, and we look forward to having you again. Thank you all, my Facebook, my YouTube audience. Thank you all. This is Shelby from Safe Space. You all have a wonderful evening. Bye, Dr. Francis.
Bye-bye. Thank you.